Welcome to the February 26th meeting of the Columbia Rotary Club. Glad to have everyone here today. We're going to go ahead and get started, and we have a very special guest with us today. Miss Ellen Weaver is going to be on the piano. Off the ground to lead us. Go ahead. To come and lead us in our invocation.
Please join me in prayer. Dear Lord, we come to you thankful for this day and for the opportunity to gather once again as a Rotary Club. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to fellowship with one another and for the privilege we have to serve our community as Rotarians. Help us always be reminded that when you called us to go therefore and make disciples of all nations, that for our club, that opportunity starts right here in Columbia. Lord, we ask that you bless this food in the hands that prepared it. Keep us focused always on you, our God, and those that we serve. And we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Chase. Thank you, Ellen.
Aren't you getting any food?
I said I didn't want to fall asleep in the middle of my presentations.
All right. If everyone will hold up the card buckets, they should be full of money just overflowing on the floor. Please give generously to the card fund. Please give generously. Yes? All right. I'm going to go ahead and ask Regina Brown to come up, and she's going to do visiting Rotarians and guests.
Can I just have the microphone here?
Good afternoon again. We have one visiting Rotarian, Mr. Beaver Hardy from the Columbia East Club. Mr. Hardy, welcome. If you have any guests with you, if you would please stand so we can get your guests introduced.
Thank you. I'm Rusty DePass, and my guest today is Perry Orth, who's with the ING Insurance Group.
I'm John Irion. I have with me Ed Tucker, who's visited with us before. Please welcome Ed.
Hope everybody have a great Rotary Monday.
Thank you, Regina. Appreciate you. I forgot to mention it 2 weeks ago, and I promised that I would mention it every single day, but our golf tournament is April 23rd at the Windermere Club. And please consider playing, consider sponsoring. Please be involved in this tournament. We will have all of the information for you at the end, probably at the meeting next Monday, but you're going to be so sick of hearing about it, and you're going to be so happy to give to it. So appreciate the golf committee for meeting earlier before this meeting. We're hoping that it's going to be a great day of weather and a great day of golf. So I'm going to go ahead now and ask Regina to come back up here. We're going to start with Discover Rotary.
Didn't realize I was going to have the whole day today. So I'm Regina Brown. I'm manager of community relations for Palmetto Health, and I manage all of our sponsorships and donations and community outreach for the hospital. So I joined Rotary for the first time in 1999. Not even a month after I joined Rotary, I could tell them I was recruited and drafted by Ellen Moore and Ann Matthews to join Rotary. And so not even a month or so after I joined Rotary, which was the Eau Claire Columbia Club, is now Eau Claire North Columbia, our president-elect resigned and said that they did not want to take on that challenge. And so got a call from Ellen and says, guess what? Is this something you will consider? And it was just like 2 days before the PETS conference, and I said, sure, I'll do it. And so that was our 2000 Rotary year, and then they were so excited to have me till I stayed president for 2 straight years of the Eau Claire Club. I held every position in that club after that except for treasurer, and then I took a little break from Rotary, and then I joined the 5 Points Rotary Club. Didn't have any positions in that club, and so we're looking for something a little different, and of course Catherine Davis introduced me to the Columbia Club, and this is where I am. And so thank you, Carrie, for giving me the opportunity. I hope everybody have a great day.
So Andrew Clarkson just asked me if I am enjoying my year as president, and I am enjoying my year very much, and I'm enjoying it so much more than my year as president-elect. So, right? Yeah, being president-elect is a really difficult, time-consuming, very rewarding experience. Yeah, but I have truly, I'm halfway through my year, and I'm truly enjoying leading this club, and all of you have been so wonderful to me, so I do appreciate all of you. Now, we have the pleasure of being led in health and happiness by Rusty DePass. So I'm going to go ahead and ask him to come up.
Thank you very much, President Carey, and I want to begin today by bringing you some serious news. First and foremost, several weeks ago, President Carey and the board were kind enough to let me distribute petitions for the Rossi family to try to keep the fellow who murdered their daughter in jail. And I want to convey to you the thanks of Anne Marie and the whole Rossi family, for those of you who did sign the petition. And you'll be pleased to know that on Wednesday of last week, Marcellus Pierce was once again denied parole. So they are. I ran into Tommy Tapp the other day, and I was giving him a hard time about not coming to Rotary, and he mentioned to me, and if I had known this, I have forgotten it, and I'm sorry, but he mentioned to me that his daughter has a brain tumor, and I was completely unaware. She's had surgery in New York, and he said that he spent a month in the Ronald McDonald House in Manhattan, which happens to be 14 stories tall, and that she is back and doing okay. She is blind in one eye, has limited vision in the other, but she is attending Brennan Elementary School and doing reasonably well. And he said, but she's taking Braille just in case. So please keep Tommy and his daughter, his family, in your thoughts and prayers. And hopefully we can get him back to Rotary sometime soon. Regina Brown has been inducted into the Richland School District 1 Hall of Fame. Jack Sloan with Palmetto Lifeline. His institution there was designated as the nonprofit of the year in Cindy Giles with Cutthroat Marketing. What a nice name. Was given the award as the new business of the year. Mike Biediger, is Mike here? Mike Biediger's son was married over the weekend, and Marty and Dave Cinema. You remember Dave Cinema, who was a member of this club for a long, long time. He and Marty now live at Still Hopes, but they just celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary. Gosh, can you imagine being married to somebody for 60 years? I don't want to go too long, but I was reminded of a story involving this true story involving a cousin of mine. He was a retired Presbyterian minister, lived in Asheboro, North Carolina, and he died earlier this month. And his funeral happened to be on Super Bowl Sunday. I said, man, you people really do know how to schedule things, don't you? But several 20 or so years ago, he was in Greenville. His wife was having some surgery there at one of the hospitals, and they were staying in a motel, and his daughter Lucy was with him, and so he checked into the room, went up to his room, and when he opened the door, this guy pushed him in and joined him in the room, and stuck a gun in his face and told him he wanted money. And so, typical of Wilkes McCauley, he inquired as to what his name was and if he had a church, and he said that his name was Johnny, and that he didn't go to church. And so Wilkes waited patiently for Lucy to arrive there in the room. Lucy opened the door, and here they were with this guy pointing a gun at them and demanding money. So as soon as she came in, Wilkes, typical Southern gentleman, he got up and he said, Lucy, this is Johnny, and Johnny, this is my daughter Lucy, and Lucy, Johnny wants to rob us. He wants money, and of course, and they didn't have any money or didn't have enough to satisfy this guy. So they agreed to get in the car, all three of them, and go to an ATM and get a few $100s, whatever you could get, and hopefully that he would be satisfied. And but before they did, Wilkes insisted that they pray, and so the three of them stand around in a group, the way you've seen people do, Billy Graham and others, and they prayed. And Wilkes prayed that Johnny would find a church, and that he would not be involved in this line of work, and that so forth and so on. Anyway, and so you really almost had to know Wilkes to know just how funny this is, but they agreed to go, and so they all got in the car. They went to an ATM and got the money, and he made them drive over near Paris Mountain, and so they were a little bit afraid that he was going to abandon them and shoot them or whatever, but they did what he said. So Lucy, on the way back toward town, found a kind of a grassy spot off to the right on the right of the road, and so she pretended to lose control of the car and kind of drove off onto the grass, at which point Johnny got out of the car and ran. So they were relieved, of course, and went on back to the motel. Anyway, several days or perhaps a week later, they were back in Asheboro, North Carolina, and where he had been the pastor of the Presbyterian Church. And the phone rang, and it was the police in Greenville. And they said, Reverend McCauley, we have found a man who robbed you. And he said, oh, that's real good. I'm just so delighted. He said, I can come down tomorrow and give you a positive identification. And they said, oh, that really won't be necessary. And he said, no. He said, I'm retired, so I mean, I don't have any problem coming down there, and I'll be glad to identify him. He said, and the cop said, well, that really won't be necessary. We're absolutely certain that he's the man who robbed you because he told us that the person he robbed prayed with him. So remember that. If you ever get robbed, you need to pray with the guy who's taking money from you. I want to end with several weeks ago, middle of January, former president of this club, Tom McCutcheon, who many of you knew, Tom died at age 98, and he had a very nice funeral service at the First Presbyterian Church, and printed on the back of the program was something that he apparently had written in 2003, and I want to share it with you. It says, I grew up in a time when women were considered as precious. I grew up in a time when 10 cents could purchase 2 loaves of bread or a ticket to the movie theater. I grew up in a time when people did not complain about where they were, but sought to increase their standing and excel. I grew up in a time when a handshake was better than a written document. I grew up in a time when there was respect for elders, respect for tradition, and respect of the family. I grew up in a time when excellence was appreciated. I grew up in a time when tradition and heritage was strong and ever recognized. I grew up in a time when respect was present whenever it should be. I grew up in a time when patriotism was above all personal considerations, when a recognition of this country was ever present, when support for the flag was above every other consideration. I grew up in a time when laziness was somewhat rare because survival commanded a different role. I came up in a time when support of others was a common denominator. I came up in a time when education was considered an absolute necessity. I came up in a time when tradition was very important. I came up in a time when loyalty to family was paramount. I came up in a time when religious affiliation was present on an active basis. I came up in a time when friendships never died. I grew up in a time when achievement was respected by all and was the goal of the majority. I grew up in a time when the underprivileged didn't believe it or accept it. I grew up in a time when clothes did not make the man or the woman, but the quality of the person did. Well, is anything different now? What have we lost? What have we gained? When people believe in each other and rely on each other and call on each other and respect each other and respond to the needs of each other, then that arena is enriched. So hold tightly to what you have, enhance it, remember others, respect the problems of others, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Thomas English McCutcheon, Jr., April 24, 2003.
Thank you, Rusty. Thank you for stepping in at the very last minute. When you do this job, sometimes you get that 4 o'clock in the afternoon Sunday text that says, hey, I can't help you tomorrow, but I have to say, Rusty, it's always has helped me any time I've ever asked, so I really appreciate you. We're going to go ahead with our speaker, and I'm going to ask Past President Andrew Clarkson to come up and introduce him.
Thank you, President Carey. It's my pleasure today to introduce Dr. Rebecca Gunnlaugsson. She's an economist specializing in public finance and taxation. She's formerly served as the Director of Division of Research and subsequently the Chief Economist for the South Carolina Department of Commerce. In these roles, she led teams analyzing economic issues impacting South Carolina and was instrumental in the reorganization of the Department of Employment and Workforce and the redesign of the state's indebtedness unemployment insurance, which is since 2014 debt-free, or fully solvent. She has done extensive research on taxation and optimization for the long-term economic growth, having testified before the 2009 Senate Finance Committee on Unemployment Insurance and the 2010 South Carolina Tax Realignment Commission, and the 2017 South Carolina House Tax Policy Review Committee, as well as having served on the 2016 Governor's Local Government Competitiveness Council. Her experience also includes as senior technology consultant for Accenture, where she was involved in firm-wide business and technology implementations. Dr. Gunnlaugsson also is currently president of Acutus, did I say that right? Okay. Acutus Economics, where she specializes in statistical analysis and economic modeling, econometric modeling for development for modeling to develop interactive visual methods to deliver data-driven insights and recommend policy solutions. Dr. Gunnlaugsson received her bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT and her PhD in economics from the University of Michigan. Rebecca, as she's asked me to call her, also is married with 3 sons, and in their spare time, in her spare time, and when permit, her husband and she enjoy mountain biking and trail hiking. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca.
Thank you very much for having me here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. That really makes me sound a whole lot better than I really am. So thank you. But truly, it is an honor to be with you here today and talk about something that's so important to our state and its future. But before I begin,
Michael, we can't hear you.
can't hear me.
Lift it up a little bit.
Lift it up. Is that better?
Yes.
All right. So before I begin, I would like to have a special thanks to Ellen Weaver and the Palmetto Promise Institute. I think all of you seem to know Ellen already, but it is really through the leadership and support of Ellen and Palmetto Promise Institute that this whole project even started, conceptualized, and came together, and that I'm even here to be able to present it to you today. So thank you very, very much, Ellen. So I have lived in South Carolina for 12 years, and I have heard about the urgent need for tax reform for 12 years. And I imagine that it's been going on for longer and longer previously since that time. And I have seen a number of commissions and task force and research studies on tax reform, and invariably, they all start off and immediately get bogged down in the weeds. And they talk about tweaking this little piece over here versus tweaking that little piece over here, or trading off this or trading off that, or don't touch this because then you'd have to do this, or something else, and it goes on and on and on. And immediately, it gets very complex and people get very, very frustrated. So this presentation I actually gave to the House Tax Reform Committee back in September. And when I started off, I said, okay, let's get rid of all those complex and frustrating issues, and let's think, why do we need tax reform? We need tax reform because we have a system that is broken. We have a system that is killing the little guy and gal here in South Carolina. And we really need a system that is fair and equitable, that is stable and sustainable, and one that promotes economic growth. And those 3 things are very fundamental to a system that we need for the prosperity of South Carolinians. But I want to let you know, here's my clicker, that we are not alone in needing tax reform. Since 2010, 23 states have established some sort of commission to study tax reform. 13 of them actually implemented rather large reforms. And this does not include all of the states that have recently jumped on the bandwagon. You may be familiar with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 that the federal government just passed. And it has sweeping impacts on all state income taxes. So a lot of states are now deciding this is a great opportunity to reform their own tax systems. And so once I add those in, these numbers are going to go up even higher. I'm also going to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. We told and we gave the same spoiler alert to the House Committee. We looked at the three big taxes: income, sales, and property. And after doing every sort of analysis we could, we told the House Committee that we thought property tax was so broken that we didn't think the committee would really be able to address it in its short existence. So what we were going to do is give them some real implementable solutions for income and sales, which is what I'm going to go over today. However, before I do that, what I want to do is take you on a journey of how we have gotten to where we are today and why it is so urgent that we reform our tax system. So I'm going to go through the underlying cause of our tax system problems, the three major and far-reaching problems that it causes. And then I'm going to go through, we will have an optimistic end where we end with the window of opportunity to solve this. So first, the overarching cause. We have an eroding tax base. And this happens in every single tax we have. The number of people that are subject, for example, income tax, the number of people who actually pay income tax in the state of South Carolina has shrunk over time. Today, 42% of people do not pay income tax. And that's just the people we know about, because if you don't actually owe income tax in South Carolina, you don't have to file a return. So there's a large number of people out there, a large number of other people out there that we don't know about. Sales tax. We have seen the number of products that are subject to sales tax decline over time. Today, only a third of products sold are subject to sales tax. Property tax. We've seen the number of properties that are subject to the full millage rate plummet. And what this erosion of the tax base does is it leads to higher tax rates. As the tax base gets smaller and smaller, we need higher and higher tax rates in order to maintain revenues. And again, we've seen this happen in every single tax. In income tax, we have seen over time the number of people who are subject to the highest marginal, the top rate, increase. Now it's 41% are subject to the top rate. We call that bracket creep, and they creep in the higher brackets over time. In sales tax, we've seen our sales tax double to 6%. And that doesn't include local sales tax, which can be up to 3% in some counties. And that doesn't include hospitality tax, which can be up to 2% in other counties. And in property tax, despite several state laws that were passed in order to slow down property tax increases, we have still seen inflation-adjusted per person property tax rates increase over 31% since 1993. So what these high tax rates do is they lead to unequal taxes. The people that are left in the eroded tax base are paying very high taxes, while the people who are outside and have the special exemptions are paying very low taxes. And again, we have examples in every single tax. A residential renter pays up to 3 times as much tax, property tax, as a residential homeowner. In sales tax, something you might buy, prepared food, like takeout food, can cost up to 10% tax in some counties versus 0% tax in other counties. And the more unequal these taxes become, the more likely it is that we have special interest groups go and talk to their legislators and request a special exemption for them, which leads to an eroded tax base, which leads to high tax base, which leads back to unequal taxes. So this is what we call an infinite loop. And this is where we are currently caught, in this infinite loop. So what are the 3 problems that this the infinite loop leads to? We have a system that's not fair, we have a system that is not sustainable, and we have a system that does not promote economic growth. I'm going to go through examples of each one of those things for you. So first, this is the property tax on a $20,000 car across 6 different counties. Well, I guess it's 7 different counties. But what you'll see is that people in Lexington pay almost double or over double on their car than people in Charleston County. and the same exact car. Now, the black is actually the amount that they pay in school taxes, whereas the blue is the amount that they pay in county taxes. So this does not include city taxes or special purpose districts. And I think, a lot of people will say, well, for example, I enjoy living in a county that has walking paths and biking trails and open green spaces, so I'm willing to pay more for that. But I think it's harder to make that argument that you would like to have your child live in a county that has worse or better education, dependent upon their residents. And it's not just across counties, it's within counties too. So this is the tax on a $2,000 home in Richland District 2. And I'm not trying to pick on any district, but I just lived in it, so I thought that it was fair game for me to throw it up there. So if I live in a $200,000 home, I pay $1,860 approximately in taxes, again, school and county. Now, let's say I get transferred to Greenville and I move there, I buy a house there, but I can't sell my house here, so I decide to rent it out. Immediately, my taxes pop up to over $6,600. And I promise you I'm going to pass as much of that along to my renter as I can. But then once I hit 65, I get to save an extra $450 or so on my house. So this is the same house for the same purpose, residential living, and we have 3 dramatically different tax rates. And again, I don't want to leave any taxes out. So income has the same problem of inequity. These are 5 different types of taxpayers, and this is the tax that they would pay on $75,000 of adjusted gross income. So you have a married family of 4 paying a little over $2,400. You have a married couple of 65 and over paying nothing. You have a single person paying $4,000, an independent contractor $2,250, and then a single parent with 2 children $3,200. So interestingly enough, every time we talk about income tax in the state, 2 overarching things come up. Number 1, we hear South Carolina has got one of the highest top tax rates, and we do. It's 7%. It is the highest in the Southeast. It's one of the highest in the nation, behind your Californias and your New Jerseys and such. But then the other thing we hear is, well, listen, on average, our tax rate is very, very low. And that is true because of this. This is exactly why. Because we have a lot of people who are in a very, very low or no tax bracket versus people who are paying at a very high rate. And on average, it is a low rate, but it's because the distribution is so unequal. And again, I'm going to have an example with sales tax because I don't want to leave any taxes out. But here I have an example when it comes to prepared versus unprepared food. So one of the things that we do is we exempt grocery store food, or what we call it unprepared food. And the primary reason behind that is to help lower income families. But when you exempt an entire category, you're exempting everything in it, from ramen noodles all the way to filet mignon. So, and you're also not taking into account that a lot of people do fast food, go to Subway, or go to the grocery store deli, and we slap state taxes and local taxes and hospitality taxes on that. So, for example, this evening, I could run by Fresh Market. I could pick up 4 sashimi grade tuna steaks and an organic salad and some sesame oil and a bottle of Perrier for dinner. And I would pay around $45, but I'd only pay 89 cents in tax, 2%, because we're in Richland County local option transportation sales tax. Or I could say I'm really too tired to cook, I'm going to go through the Bojangles drive-through and pick up a 12-count family meal, pay $26.99, and I pay $2.70 in tax, 10%. And those are disparate, very unequal taxes, but they all occur in very small amounts, so we are nickel and diming our citizens, and a lot of times we're nickel and diming the citizens who need the most help. So those are some examples of why it's not fair. Now I'm going to go through some examples of why it's not sustainable. So I mentioned that the number of goods that are subject to retail sales tax in South Carolina has declined. So So back in 2002, 48% of the stuff sold in South Carolina that went through the Department of Revenue were subject to sales tax. By the time we got to 2016, only 34% was subject to sales tax. So there's two reasons that we see such a decline or such an erosion of that sales tax base. So first of all, we just have a general shift of consumer purchases from services to goods. So for example, I could go buy a book at Barnes & Noble and I pay tax on that. If I pull up my iPad and buy that same book, I don't pay tax on that. And those are the types of things that when they were writing the tax codes back in the 1950s, they just didn't think about, because it was just, technology was nowhere near being able to envision that type of future. So the second reason that we see this is that every year when the legislature comes into session, special interest groups come and petition for special exemptions to the sales tax code. And gradually it erodes the code. And every year they all you listen to them and you say, well, yes, they shouldn't have to be paying tax on that. Every single one of them sounds great, but and gradually over time it keeps eroding the base and we keep raising the sales tax on everything that is left. So South Carolina, and you may have heard this, we have a booming population. Since 1990, we've added 1.5 million people, and actually I think it's a little bit more than that because I haven't updated it with the new 2017 census figures that just came out. But it's a 42% growth, far outpacing the nation. And what this means is that we have increased needs for education, for infrastructure, and for services. And it's not just that we're growing, but we're also aging. Back in 1990, 2 out of 10 people were age 55 and older, which means they're retired or they're getting ready to retire or they really, really want to retire. Actually, if I did it, people that really, really wanted to retire, that would be everyone. But by the time we got to 2015, that had become 3 in 10 people. That is a 108% growth rate. That is the fastest growing demographic group in the state. And as we've seen earlier, they also pay some of the lowest amount of taxes. So you can see that as that demographic group grows, it's going to continue to erode our tax base. Okay, so we've seen why it's not fair. We've seen examples of why it's not sustainable. I want to talk about why it doesn't promote economic growth. So this is a chart of our general fund going back to 1990 all the way through 2016. And it's inflation adjusted and it's per person. One thing you might notice is that as we come into economic booms, we make more, and as we go into recessions, we don't make as much. And that's really our spending pattern. We make more, we spend more, we make less, we spend less. Which I think all of you, your experience in business know that that's not really good budget planning. And it's not fair to taxpayers in economic booms, and it's not fair to the people who rely on government promises in downturns. But the other thing you'll notice is that in 2016, our general fund was bringing in $148 less per person in real inflation-adjusted dollars. So despite having very high rates, our eroding tax base is eating into our long-run revenue stability and will require higher tax rates to maintain revenues and create even greater disparity. And the higher tax rates are a huge imposition on economic growth. And our property tax puts us at a severe economic disadvantage with relation to other states. So we have various classes of properties with industry, business, so that's commercial, small businesses, and apartment rentals, automobiles, and home. We actually have several other classes, but I'm just focusing on these. Our industrial tax rate in Columbia is the highest among every big city in the United States. And some of you may say, well, I think I heard that the tax rate was getting dropped on industrial properties last year. And it's not really good news, but the good news is that even with the drop, Columbia will still be first in this ranking, closely followed by Detroit, Michigan. For small business property tax, we are 7th in the highest in the nation. Automobiles, we are the 6th highest statewide in the nation, but we have very, very low home primary residence taxes. And really it is very much a trade-off. Act 388, which was passed back in 2006, is partially responsible for eroding the tax base and requiring school districts to put so much squeeze on small businesses and apartments and automobiles and every other tax class. This is how we look versus our neighbors. South Carolina, we are 7th highest in the nation, but we are highest in the Southeast. And except for a couple of other states, we are highest by far in the Southeast. Now, no one set out to really tax our small businesses and our apartment complexes this highly. It just happened due to ad hoc changes over time that led to unintended consequences that have put such a high burden on these properties. Okay, so I know this has all been very, very pessimistic, but we are going to get to the fun part of the presentation. So we built 3 models. We built one for income, one for sales, and one for property. And it literally took a year. It took a year of collecting data from multiple agencies and multiple sources, a year of compiling and analyzing data sets, a year of writing code, a year of developing interactive interfaces, and then of testing multiple different scenarios to come up with something that was optimized not just for state revenues, but for individual taxpayers as well. And here's what we presented as recommendations to the House Committee. A simple, low-tax, broad-based tax system based on economic fundamentals. We are talking about cutting the state sales tax rate in half to 3% on an expanded base of goods and services. We are talking about shifting to a flat income tax rate. We suggested 5% with very large, generous standard deductions to protect our lower income and our middle income families. And I know I told you that we told you state property taxes were good, but with the data that we have an incomplete data set of property, we think we could get to a dual assessment rate of 4% and 6%. And if you are familiar with property tax in South Carolina, you know that we have multiple assessment rates that go from 4% all the way up to 10.5%. So this would be a very, very big change. Now, I have actually really exciting news, and I meant to tell you this at the beginning of the presentation, but last week, the House Committee met and reviewed a plan that was really modeled on the income and the sales tax. And they actually the House research staff presented legislation that could do this. And actually, they used updated projection growth from the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office, and they were able to get the flat income tax rate down to 4.85, still with these large standard deductions and personal exemptions. So I was delighted that we have some traction and the House is really picking this up. Now, we have a plan, but we really need to talk about how to implement it. And what we were recommending is sort of a 3-phase plan for implementation, starting with income and sales, because those, and I don't want to say that they're simple, but those are the ones that we've been able to model out, and those are the ones that the House Committee has come up with draft legislation for. And following that, we're also talking about, and while that's being implemented, we're talking about taking a deep dive into the property tax. And property tax is so intertwined with K-12 education funding that those are the perfect 2 things to look at together to come up with a joint solution for the 2 of those. And then finally, we only focused on the big 3, sales, income, and property tax. But there are a lot of other taxes out there that really need the same type of attention. Corporate income tax would be first and foremost, but like I said, there's a tremendous number of other taxes, and then we would tackle those. But one of the things we really recommend is taking a phased-in approach of 5 to 7 years to do incremental changes, so they're not as effective, that they don't affect the economy or the taxpayers as much. The other thing that I think is really interesting that we recommend is having a system of tax triggers. And a lot of states have done this, including North Carolina, where once you reach a certain revenue threshold, your tax rates decline. And so as you reach new revenue thresholds, your tax rates decline, and that helps phase it in. But it also ensures that you maintain the appropriate revenue levels as you go forward. In fact, North Carolina, they have since lowered their tax rate farther than they had planned to in their original legislation because of tax triggers. So, as I close today, I'm going to tell you I'm a little disappointed I'm closing in time for enough questions. I was hoping to talk all the way to the end for you. But as we close, I think we all have a general sense of why we need tax reform, because again, I've been hearing about it for 12 years, and I know that people have been talking about it far longer than that. The overriding question might be, why now? And we really have a pending perfect storm of fiscal dilemmas that are facing the state. First, we still have a Supreme Court decision on Abbey bill that is overhanging the state that really demands that we figure out how we fund schools and probably overhaul that. We also have neighbors who are competitively and aggressively changing, broadening their bases and equalizing their taxes and lowering them in order to compete. North Carolina, as I mentioned, has recently reduced their income tax rate down to 5.5%. Georgia just announced that they're using the new federal tax laws to reduce their rates to 5.25%. And South Carolina is sitting out there with a 7%. And it does affect the way people view us. We also have a hugely growing population, and we have ever-increasing infrastructure needs. And now with the federal tax changes looming over us, we have the potential that if we allow them to come through to the state level, that we will end up with a tax increase for most of our citizens. So the need is there, the writing's on the wall. The question is, do we act before it becomes a crisis? Because if it's a crisis, we don't talk about lowering tax on a broad base. We talk about broadening the base on the same high tax. We don't talk about phasing it in over time and making small changes. We talk about something that's more akin to ripping off the Band-Aid. But this plan really is one that sets the future for South Carolina, and it provides fairness for hardworking citizens. It provides the stability and sustainability we need to fund our government services into the future. And it really sets the stage for economic growth that create the jobs and opportunities of tomorrow. It is what our state needs for future sustainability, and it's what our people need. And unfortunately, I've got 12 minutes left. Yes.
What are your thoughts on the so-called Fair Tax Act, which proposes replacing our entire federal tax system with just the sales tax, which is, I think they call for 23%?
Yes. So, I mean, it's very nuanced, and every fair tax seems to be slightly different than everyone else's fair tax. But there are a couple of things that you want to think about. We in economic taxation talk about, I often refer to a three-legged stool of income, property, and sales tax. And traditionally, through recessions, you have, again, historically, until 2007, which changed everything, you have seen declines in one versus another, so you still have revenues from another in order to support your state or your local government or all your revenue needs. Again, 2007 blew that away because all three of them went down. But from that standpoint, it provides, having additional revenue streams provides diversity when you're going into those negative downturns. Yes, please.
You mentioned we a couple of times. What organization is really pushing this plan in the legislature?
Okay, so I have been partnered with the Palmetto Promise Institute, and they have helped provide the sort of support to get this going. But in terms of this, what we set out to collect data, build models, and see what they showed us. see what scenarios could optimize taxation in South Carolina and which ones could optimize taxation among individuals as well. We base the plan purely on economic fundamentals of a low tax and a broad base. You know, when you implement taxation, the goal of that is to raise just enough revenues so your government can provide services without providing economic distortions throughout the economy. You don't want taxes where if you have loopholes or if you have other exemptions, people tend to game the system and they make their economic decisions not based on what's best for the economy, but what's best for avoiding taxes. So that's really what the goal that we came at. When I say we, me and Palmetto Promise. Yes.
You mentioned the substantial growth that we have when new people come into the state.
Yes.
What is the composition of that group typically? Are they creating more pressure or are they relieving?
Well, so now I don't honestly I don't have fully the breakdown of which states they're coming from and I don't have all the demographic details. However, the majority of them, that plus innate population growth is providing a push towards having higher and higher levels of people at the upper end of the age spectrum. The Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office, they have a really nice chart. It's sort of it's called a bell chart, but if you have the oldest people at the top, there's the youngest people at the bottom. It used to be males on this side, females on this side. It used to be like that. So you had a lot of people in the younger ages and working ages. Today, it looks more like that. So you really have, you've seen a decrease in the percentage of young people and an increase in the percentage of older. And they're projecting that it's going to start looking more like that. So you're going to have more people at the top. So, but that's not to say everyone that's moving in is necessarily 65 and older. We have a tremendous number of people that are moving in for better jobs, lower income, or lower standard of living, and just because, I mean, who wouldn't want to leave South Carolina? So, yes.
Where's the South Carolina Chamber come down?
Well, we did present to the Chamber a few weeks ago, and we had a very receptive, it was very receptive from all of the business leaders that were in the Chamber. I don't know that they specifically released an opinion or support on it. I might let Ellen talk on that if you don't mind.
That was the Columbia Chamber.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
We had not presented to the state chamber.
Oh, thank you, I'm sorry, you are correct, thank you. Yes.
This looks very much like something that is working toward a proposal that I've made over a number of years to wipe it all out and go to a transaction tax where everything gets taxed and the rate is something like 1 to 1.5%. And I'm told that if it applied to everything, no exceptions, that we would probably pay not a lot less than we're paying now, but the effect of it would be to tax the people who spend the money, which strikes me as eminently fair. And I wonder what your thought would be on that. I mean, I realize you couldn't go to something like that immediately, but this looks like it's moving in that direction. Also, let me ask you to please go present this to Cindy Scoppy at the state newspaper, because she thinks we hardly pay any taxes around here at all.
Except alcohol taxes. Yes, no, and I agree with you that I think the transaction tax you're talking about might be similar to the fair tax, but you're right. It's the economic fundamentals of broadening the base, not eroding the base, but broadening the base. And if you broaden the base, you can bring the tax rates down very, very low so that they are not burdensome. And I might point out that this proposal, low tax, broad base, is the exact opposite of what we have in South Carolina right now, which is eroded base, high taxes. Yes?
I was in the legislature in 1981. First week on the job, first bill on the calendar was a $600 cap on sales tax on automobiles. And speaker after speaker got up and said, we're only doing this because North Carolina has a cap. Our Rock Hill dealers are losing business. If they ever appeal theirs, I'll be the first one back up here to come up here and appeal ours. And that was a half a century ago. North Carolina did away with theirs. The next year, we still got it. And so somebody who buys a $500,000 airplane pays the same tax as somebody who makes a minimum wage, has a total hopper, gets to the convenience store to go to work.
Yes,
But
yeah.
is that ever going to change?
Well, and under this, the recommendation is that it would. Again, when you're in a crisis and you're talking about removing caps, I mean, we're talking about then a 6% sales tax plus, in Richland County, an extra 2%, so an 8% sales tax on, a car or, and that's very burdensome. Again, acting before we hit the crisis and broadening the base and bringing it down low, then we're talking about a 3% sales tax. And then removing those caps is much more palatable. Yes.
I have from personal experience, I've lived in 5 states in my working career. I've had, in Tennessee, 0. The other 4 had a tax. The first thing you need to do if you live in another state, they tell you 7% tax, is ask 7% of what? Okay? An example, when I moved from Georgia to Wisconsin, there was only a 1% tax increase, I think from 6 to 7%. When my tax accountant did my taxes comparatively were 50% more in Wisconsin than they were in Georgia because of deductions. So be aware when somebody says it's only 7 or 6% tax.
Yes, no, thank you, you are absolutely right. Yes.
Which kind of goes back to Rusty's point, but my question is there a real proposal that you're making that's in front of the legislature, because that's where this has to happen? And is there any realistic possibility of getting them to just wipe it out, like Rusty said, and go to a 1.5% or a 2% across the board? Because then you do get everything. Not only that, you get the people that are the underground economy, the tips, the drug dealers, everybody else starts paying. Because right now they're not paying a dime.
If you don't mind, I'm going to defer to Ellen because she lives in the political world and I live in the data world.
Well, I was just going to say, what's really encouraged me about this is that this isn't us lobbying the legislature to do this. We have provided them with the data and the research that Rebecca has done, but it really is being driven by the leadership of the House at this point. Speaker Lucas came and spoke to the tax committee last week and expressed his support for a plan like this. And really, I think that's what we've seen in states that have been successful in reforming their tax codes, is that there has to be leadership at the highest levels of the legislature to lock arms and get it done, because otherwise you have lobbyists and special interest groups who are going to go up there and pick off every proposal piece by piece by piece. And what North Carolina saw to be successful was that when the legislators had the political will and locked arms, they moved forward, got it done, and it's paid dividends for their state. So I would just say that's been the encouraging thing to me, is that really the will to drive this tax policy has to start in the House, and it's really arising from the House leadership.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Rebecca, and she said that she would hang around just a few minutes to answer any further questions if you have, and we're out of time. So Ellen's going to play for us again, and we're going to end with song.